I'm not having that. So most of it is
It's kind of a better picture in here.
all right.
There we go.
Good evening. Tonight is Monday, October 24th, 2022, and I am calling to order the Committee of the Whole for this evening. The first item on the agenda is under Section B, items from Council Office. We have item 2022-0301, a request from, I will just turn this over to Clerk Van Meter to
Sure.
go over this with us. Thank you.
This is the Ohio Division of Liquor Control notice to council regarding a permit. The permit itself is an update to stock ownership. This has been reviewed by the Division of Police, and there are no objections from the administration. So the only thing I would need feedback on is if anyone did request that there be a hearing on the matter.
So if no objections, then no action needs to be taken.
Correct.
All right, any discussion?
Where is this? Where is the place?
It's under item B.
Morrison. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't open, yeah. I got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's Jordan's
Yeah,
Deli,
still
I
not
think.
Yes, Jordan's Deli.
Okay, oh, okay. Now I know where it is. I don't see where it says Jordan's. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving on to Section C on the agenda, items from the Department of Economic Development. Mr. Director Strum, we've got ordinance number 62-2022, an ordinance to authorize the mayor to enter into a revised development agreement related to the project known as the Crescent at Central Park to support related infrastructure needs of the project and expanded uses within the development site. Director Strum?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is bringing this back after 2 weeks ago. We had an initial conversation around this, and there was a number of questions that I really wasn't prepared to answer that evening. And we all kind of discussed about how it would be more important to have the team from the development squad who are looking at doing this project come forward. So to that, we have invited Aaron Underhill, who's of the council to Casto team in this project. Griffin Caldwell, Development Associate from Casto, and Colby Turnock, who's the Vice President at Casto Communities, here this evening. Attached to this document, so there's a couple questions from council previously related to some of the documents in question that were originally presented 2 weeks ago. So what you should see now is an updated red line. Mr. Underhill's office was able to take a look back at the original document, update that red line accordingly, so you should have that updated red line in front of you. The other thing that was asked of council was to take the initial financial estimates that council reviewed 18 months ago, 2 years-ish ago on this project and redigest them a little bit and put that package back together. So what I did was I ran the original project through our existing ROI calculator. In that space, I made some assumptions, not necessarily reflective of the developers themselves, on other comparable projects and product in the marketplace today and what that reflective value would be, as well as job estimate numbers based on my best practices. And then I reran the numbers on the ROI as well for the proposed new project. So what you'll see this evening in those ROI packages, and I'm happy to review any of that with you, under the original arrangement, It was about a 5% ROI with the hotel, event center, et cetera, plus the NCA. So my office did not run an analysis on the NCA projections. Those were included as part of the Casto team's submission. Under the updated analysis that my office ran related to the ROI, including some additional job numbers and inclusion of TIF, we have an 85% return on investment plus the NCA valuations that were not included in as part of that calculation. So to that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and the team to start walking through this PowerPoint that they provided, and then we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Mr. Underhill? You'll need to speak directly into the microphone.
Close.
How about that?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, Aaron Underhill with Underhill and Hodge. Good to see you all again. This is a project that, has been in the works for several years. I know we worked very hard on it previously, and wanted to walk you through the changes here to our plan and kind of to the financial model that we're asking you to bless, and we'll then be happy to take your questions. So here's the approved site plan from a couple of years back, maybe 2-3 years back now. We obviously had a mix of uses there. We committed at the time, in addition to the multifamily, to hold back 4 acres of the site for marketing for office purposes for, I believe, a 7-year period. And since that time, we've had some things change, mostly for the good, but in terms of the private side, we've had some things happen that have really changed how the scope of the deal needs to work. Proposed site plan here really is not markedly different. We will walk you through the changes, but what we're most excited about is up in the northwest portion of the site is a medical office prospect that we have that is going to bring significant payroll to the city, and I think continue to capitalize on some of the things that have happened at Buckles Court North. I think in all of our minds, it's been a very, very good success. There's been a strong market here, and I think the multifamily, as we said, is, even though it's not built yet, has really been attractive in getting these users to get interest in the site. And this user in particular, who for confidentiality reasons we can't say who it is yet, but is particularly attracted to the site due to that multifamily coming into play later for their employees to have a place to live. So this increases the multifamily acreage by 2.2 acres. Really, if you look at what was approved previously, so we're going from 264 to 296 units. From a purely legal and technical standpoint, the previous approval would have allowed up to 312 units. As we went through the process with all of you, that got down to 264. So we could really fit all of these units on the site as it exists today, but really the impetus for increasing the size of the project in terms of its land area is to accommodate the clubhouse, move it southward. Let's see if I can get you oriented. You'll see there the little pool down there on the southern part of the site on Tech Center Drive, and that's where there you go, where we're moving the clubhouse, and that's mostly to accommodate this relatively significant office user up on the north. In exchange, in place of 2 hotels and an event center, or the 50,000 square foot medical office facility, the numbers are shown later in the presentation, but there's a very significant payroll and a very much of a benefit to the city from a financial standpoint from having this use as compared to the hotels. We did believe in the hotels in terms of, at one time, in terms of their ability to become a reality and, generate some bed tax revenue, but frankly, this opportunity presented itself, and it's really a no-brainer in terms of we have a user that we know is real, it's not speculative, and we're going to have a much bigger financial impact positively on the city than we would have otherwise. With this, we're exceeding what was that previous 4-acre office commitment, and we're going to have 7 acres of office that are indeed a reality. This is just another view of those projects side by side here again. Different drawing and color lines, but you can see that this is largely the same project, just with a little more land area. This is the location of where we had proposed previously hotels and event center, and we now are replacing that with the office building you see there, obviously in a very conceptual layout, but in order to accommodate the parking needs of the project, at 50,000 square feet, 7 acres is required. So you may ask, why are we back? The main reason here is that our underlying property owner, per our previous contract, had committed to making a substantial investment in the north-south public street that is to be put into place. For various personal reasons, which I, just for privacy purposes, don't want to get into, our seller was unable to perform. And so we have spent the better part of the last year and a half trying to roll up our sleeves and figure out how we could make this work. So we have an approved project here, but essentially a much more expensive project, requiring a lot of capital outlay, not only for the project itself, but now Casto would take down the entirety of the 41 acres and we'll be developing, we'll be working on the office development, and we'll be marketing the other perimeter properties on its own. So it's going to outlay the money for that. And then obviously the investment that was going to be made into the north-south public street is now much more significant, with Casto having to bear that burden. And that's why we're back tonight. So we are a believer in the project in terms of what it's going to mean to you guys financially as the city and its benefit. And while we thought it was a very much a positive previously, this is really about as good as it gets. And we're extremely excited to bring forth the project, including the medical office. And by adding a number of units here, it helps with the TIF and what it will generate for us over a period of time. Multifamily uses, as we discussed the last time around, tend to really kick off a good deal of TIF money, and the additional units are going to be critical to making the numbers work here. These numbers are, we've worked closely with Nate on, comparing apples to apples here. And the approved plan was anticipated over a period of 30 years to generate about $55 million in revenues, public revenues. With this, we're looking at 73 million, a net of more than $18 million to the good. Largely, number one, due to this medical office user, and then number two, to some additional units that can be thrown into the TIF and generate revenue to pay for that street, and then at some point will flow back into the city's coffers for other development or public infrastructure opportunities. We wanted to compare what this meant in terms of losing those hotels and the bed tax associated with it, and comparing that to the income tax generation from the medical office user. And you can see here, this is where the lion's share of the increase is coming. These numbers are really fantastic, and I think another reason to support the change to the plan. So with that, happy to pull any of those back up as you would like. The development agreement itself, I believe, had been executed by the city, but due to the issues going on with our seller at the time, we were unable to get a signature for all the reasons I've described on that agreement previously. So we are really taking the existing agreement and modifying it before it was fully executed. But now with Casto and its related LLC having control over the property, it has the ability to sign that agreement and see this all come to fruition once and for all. So with that, happy to take any of your questions. I've got a couple gentlemen here that were introduced from Casto, and we'll try to answer your questions the best we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Caldwell or Mr. Turnock, did you have anything that you wanted to present in terms of the project or the proposal? Okay. I think that just to kick us off a little bit, maybe could we have some discussion on the financial changes from the approved agreement to what's in front of us now and what you're asking for now? I appreciate you've gone over, I think, the site plan differences, but I think we'd also like to hear about an overview of the differences in terms of financial asks. Thank you.
So the principal request as part of this project was an adjustment to the projected TIF. So in an initial project, I believe, the request was for a $1.2 million inclusion of TIF revenues to support infrastructure on the property. Is that right, Aaron? Is that number? 1.4, sorry.
1.4.
And so it has jumped up to a 4.5 number. So it's significantly more. But I think Aaron articulated a moment ago, the project kind of has changed pretty substantially. I believe there was an obligation as part of the original development agreement to have the underlying seller kind of handle a lot of that initial upfront cost in the infrastructure, and we were just kind of the backstop of some of the improvements. Now the TIF would be taking on the full responsibility of the public infrastructure associated with the project. So that would include the road, water, sewer, et cetera, servicing the new parcels. So that's obviously the first one that jumps to the forefront. I will note, based upon my calculations, and again, when you look at those numbers, and I think Councilman Schnetzer is really kind of digging in. I saw him pull out a calculator a moment ago. I saw it. It's fine. You do a 20% on the first 10 of the initial projections. So that's the 80% CRA valuation off the top. You take 20% of that as the TIF pilot off the baseline, and then you do 100% for the balancing 20 years. So that's how you're going to calculate some of those values out. At the end of the day, I think we are well, as you can see into this model, that this is Casto's derived model. I can pull up my model. If we learned anything from Jeff Harris's presentation from 6 weeks ago, it's in our best interest to trust their numbers, verify with my numbers. That's why you're going to see a little bit different here. The truth's somewhere in the middle. But looking at what our anticipated repops are going to be, we're safely in the black in the overall TIF generation on the project, in my opinion.
Could you summarize all of the incentives at play in this project? I know that we've discussed, there's an NCA that's being developed, there's the TIF that we've discussed. Could you go over the CRA?
Sure. So the site itself is located in a pre-1994 CRA, which is an 80% 10-year tax abatement on the approved values of the property in question. The developer is also requesting TIF proceeds in excess of $4.5 million in support of public infrastructure needs associated with the project. And then the NCA, candidly, Councilwoman, we're using NCA as a term in the incentive side of it, but really it's a value to us. It's generating various roll-off dollars from taxes generated on the property that are specifically geared towards public improvements, and specifically, I think, the park development and park expansion across the street, with some of the NCA dollars being dedicated towards. So it actually offsets some additional public dollars that would normally have gone towards that project. But for the project, the NCA wouldn't have existed. So it's hard to calculate, and that's why I didn't want to include it as part of my traditional ROI calculations for that exact reason. We don't typically deal with those NCAs in the city. I could certainly pull those values back if you'd like. But I wanted to provide a baseline plus as part of my ROI spreadsheets that you see in front of you. Kevin, is it possible to pull up from the council report my PDFs?
This report that was filed this week?
Yes.
The ROI?
Yes.
Thank you. We have it on our...
Please bear with us one moment while he pulls it up. Because I'm working off my cell right now, and that's not helping you guys at all, quite frankly.
We have it on...
Yeah, but I think it'd be helpful for anyone in the audience, because I'm talking in hyperbole at this point, because they don't really know the baselines. Go to the ROI. Yeah, that's a rough one. ROI, not the original. There's a lot of documents in support of the project.
Talking about the update, the 1024? Number 13.
Number 13, thank you, ma'am. It's coming.
That's an Excel sheet, though.
Yes.
That's what you want.
What's important in that Excel sheet is actually how it flows back into the math. So if you could go to the total project ROI, Kevin, the second notebook.
Second number.
So what you're seeing there, if you could zoom, yep. What you're seeing there is a TIF estimate, so that's what TIF's being requested of us at a 4.569 valuation. If you want to scroll down a little bit, my friend. The total value of the abatement on the property is $8.9 million, almost $9 million total. Again, we've always talked about how buildings aren't valued to the city, but so that's not calculated as part of the equation, but the total payroll is. Construction income tax is also included in there. The construction sales tax is not, but it is a generation. You want to scroll down a little bit farther, Kevin? So your total school compensation on the project is $22 million. Projected TIF payments is in excess of $15 million that I calculated. Their number was 14, and I did a very conservative calculation on mine. Our total compensation of investment to the city is over $66 million with an outlay of about $35 million. And that's through all phases. So each of those notebooks represents a different component of the project. The commercial being just that, a retail commercial element. The multifamily being what we're talking about here this evening, the expansion of those housing units. The medical office, we've already kind of touched through Aaron's comments. The fueling station is just that, it's a fueling station. And then the comps, the last sheet is actually probably the most important sheet of all from a TIF standpoint. It shows you exactly what we're comping against in the marketplace. So we did our best to identify comparable sites throughout all of Gahanna that'll help us baseline exactly what these values could be expected to be at the completion of their project. So for the fueling station, we use the UDF on Johnstown here on the west side. For the medical office, we use a facility over in the existing office center park down here off of Morrison and Tech Center Drive. For the multifamily, we use the park up here on Hamilton. And for the commercial, we use Rocky Fork. So I'm very confident in our comp values. And so those building values and how they generate into the TIF, I believe are to be exceptionally accurate.
Thank you, Director. All right. Mr. Weaver.
Quick question. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you walk us through the impact of the state infrastructure bank loan on the
Great question.
repayment?
So that was actually brought up, and since that conversation, what was included in the initial staff report, Director Burry, who is also here, wanted to pummel me as she's going through her own analysis internally as it relates to that. We're actually going to be evaluating other potential obligations and pass-throughs for the city. The SIB is a pass-through in this instance. CASTO would be looking to be recapturing some of those values. The reason why that's important, and I was sharing this with Councilwoman Bowers earlier, I mentioned this to the mayor just earlier today, you know, in the marketplace that we're in today, and I'm sure Councilman Snetzer can echo this, or maybe I'm just going to butcher a report I saw. In the last 5 years, we've been working in an equity market where cash has been very inexpensive, and you're able to kind of capitalize a lot of these things at a much more rapid rate. With the increase in interest rates, debt has become more expensive, and so you're trying to identify lesser expensive resources to funnel into these projects to serve as interim financing tools. The SIB is one of those tools that could be done in this capacity. We could do a 10 or 20-year note at less than 3% interest. And so that'd be a significantly lower rate than what you could find in the open marketplace if you were to do another debt loan. But given that our debt capacity in the city and some of the aspirational goals we have for next year, we're actually evaluating other resources that could be supported that may not come in the form of debt, such as a SIB or something of that nature, Councilman.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is that a fair statement, Councilman Snetzer?
Some of it.
Thank you, sir.
Could I just ask for clarification before, because I know you've got a long discussion ready, teed up. Okay. Just for clarification on that, when you say,
This is not obligated us to do anything on the SIB, just so we're clear. There was referenced as a part of the report, but we don't have an agreement. We don't have an anticipated term sheet or anything with ODOT. I want to make sure that's perfectly clear for the body.
yes, I guess, I just wanted to clarify so could you explain a little bit more about what you mean about other financing options, financing that the city would undertake, or a note that the city would give to CASTO, or could you explain a little bit more what you mean about that?
That kind of depends on what CASTO is looking for as part of the project. I think the conversation they had with me was trying to find an interim financing tool that could be recaptured and repaid through the TIF itself. And so the SIB would serve as a pass-through as that interim initial piece until the TIF fully matures and allows for debt repayment, which could happen as soon as what, in the 10-year mark, give or take, gents? Yeah. You're going to have enough capitalized in dollars to kind of start repaying things. That was really the point that they were looking for. There's no 4 million plus a 2 on the SIB. It's really just about trying to get an interim financing vehicle to support the initial infrastructure tranche.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. I think from Casto's perspective, it's all about getting an interest rate that makes sense. That, I mean, we all know if you want to go buy a home today, it's a lot different than what it used to be. And so using the city as a way to, they have a lot more cheaper financing mechanisms than we do, and to use the TIF to support it, I think, makes a lot of sense, and over the long run, saves a lot of dollars in interest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I may, I have a couple of what I'll refer to as, I guess, technical or quantitative questions first, and then maybe another set of questions that can best be described as qualitative. I don't have to ask those in succession. If anybody else wants to jump in after these. This first question is probably best suited for Director Burry. If the city were to enter into the State Infrastructure Bank loan, does it count against our debt capacity, or does it fall outside?
It falls outside of that.
Okay.
But the problem is that as part of that, we have to state what funding that we're using to pledge against it. So it's all about the timing when that TIF starts to generate and when we did. So that's kind of the tricky part of it. What are we going to pledge in order to
State the funding source to whom? Like the auditor's office, or?
No, so as part of the state program, when you go into the SIB agreement, you have to clearly state what you are pledging to repay
Yeah.
that SIB loan.
Okay.
And depending on the timing of when that SIB would be issued, when the funding would be drawn down,
Yep.
and when the TIF would start to produce, it's kind of a
Yeah, I understand.
difficult.
As a point of reference, when we did the last SIB arrangement up at the ADB project, for example, we have a fully guaranteed deposit from the company on hand as a separate account within the city, and then we're using grant dollars to kind of backfill that off. And so we did the worst case scenario of holding, I think it was 1.4, 1.5 in the bank for us, and then as they are eligible for reimbursement off of grants, that number gets lowered. That has a release back to them, and then at the end of the day, we use the balance of that to pay off the rest of the SIB. So that was what we were able to show as a guarantee to the state for those repayment purposes. That repayment process has not been identified with Casto, nor has it been articulated as part of any future arrangement.
Okay. So sort of the implied question there is obviously the city has essentially taken a few steps down the path to a very large
Correct.
capital improvement project here in the near future. As written in this agreement, is there anything that we should be aware of, any constraints that this agreement might create with regard to that very large capital improvement project?
As far as the projections going forward and when the TIF will produce, typically how other arrangements have been made is that the developer undertakes some sort of debt instrument on their end, and then basically we set up repayment to them from the TIF based on certain percentages as it starts to produce. So very similar to like our Eastgate projects or the Hamilton Road project, where we're not issuing any debt and not going towards our limitations, or basically pledging through a TIF arrangement that we will make certain payments so that they can meet their debt service, or repay them on a reimbursement basis if they're not issuing debt on their end. So not being fully versed in all the arrangements that are currently there, I can't speak to anything associated with that. If Nate or they want to go into a little bit more detail on those.
I guess maybe to provide a bit more context, I'm familiar with sort of the typical arrangement,
Sure.
right? Which frankly is the one that we've already agreed to. City will, reimburse the developer to the tune of 1.4 million from TIF revenues as they accrue. The wrinkle that I'm trying to kind of understand a bit better here is how does entering into an agreement with the state for a state infrastructure bank loan, and to your point, Joanne, about we need to tell the state how we're going to pay them back. If the TIF isn't necessarily producing for some period of time, whether it's 6 months, 18 months, 24, just pick a number, does that sort of, that gap in timing and potential payments does it raise any concerns for, again, our ability to finance or fund other projects that we have on the horizon?
Right, it would all be based on the timing of the draws, because basically with how the SIB arrangements are written, is you're kind of at a zero interest
Okay.
for a certain amount of time to allow that construction to begin and those draws to start. Once the first draw is made on those funds, then they establish what that repayment kind of looks like based on the resources that you pledge. So that's where the timing could potentially cause some problems. If the draw for the project begins and term comes and we have to start making payment and the TIF hasn't begun producing at the level expected. So then we'd have to find other resources to meet those obligations.
Okay.
Until the TIF starts producing and we can repay ourselves.
So it sounds like the key takeaway is maybe a little bit more homework is involved, and before we sort of jump into this, we need to basically understand the timing and some of that a little bit better. Okay.
Correct.
What would be the other areas that you would go if it was not, the TIF was not, you said there would be other places that we would need to go. What would those be?
Well, we'd have to meet the obligation, so
Yes.
most of our funding, depending on what type of infrastructure we were talking about, if it's road or street related, we could look at our gas tax availability. We could look at the availability of maybe permissive tax dollars to use. So it just depends on what the infrastructure improvements are and what resources that we have that are allowed to be used for that purpose.
Thank you.
The next question I have is, this really just kind of popped into my head. I was staring at, Nate, I assume this is your ROI calculator.
It's mine,
up
yes.
there. How would a potential change in that millage rate over the life of this agreement impact your ROI calculations, assuming that went higher than the number that's shown up there?
Are you thinking, you could just put a number in there, Kevin, and it'll repop everything. Are you thinking 96, or where would you want to put the millage rate at?
105?
Put 105 in there. Should recalculate everything. Oh, enable, yeah.
So basically, as the millage rate goes up, the value of the abatement goes up, and the cost of that abatement is borne by the city, correct?
Correct, and it's part of the existing arrangement with the schools.
Understood. Okay. And then the next question I have is really just kind of understanding some of the mechanics and maybe simplifying what's shown on page 5. This is under section 4, reimbursement of costs. As I understand the previously agreed to terms, and Nate, you recap some of this, but forgive me for any redundancy here. The original estimated costs of the public infrastructure were $3.4 million, of which $1.4 million the city had agreed to cover by way of future TIF revenues.
Correct.
So that's roughly a 60-40 split, 41% city, 59% developer. I just want to make sure I understand this correct. The new estimated costs, at least listed here, are 4.4. You've shown a number slightly higher than that up on the...
I'm adding capitalized interest and some other costs, and I'm, again, trying to be as conservative as possible in some of those
Sure.
estimates.
But the new agreement,
Shows a 4.4 number in that agreement still.
whether it's through a SIB loan or just outright city pays by way of TIF revenues, the city, this agreement would suggest that the city is on the hook for 100% of the cost.
That was what they that's what they have requested as part of the revision.
Okay? Just want to make sure I understand that.
Nope, you are absolutely correct, Councilman.
Okay.
One thing I neglected, I'm sorry, Mr. Snezzer. One thing I neglected to mention in my presentation is the medical office component. Maybe it's neither here nor there, but we're basically going to be selling that at a break even on the land. So it's really not a moneymaker, but we felt it was important. It's important for a number of reasons. It's important for the city. I mean, we're not Santa Claus over here, right? But it's important for the city. But we also thought that was, being able to do that and get that user there helped with our ask on the other end and getting the money out of the TIF. And because you'll be, the city's getting a lot more income taxes than we ever dreamed, should this come to be, which we believe it will. TIF dollars are oftentimes, it's the portion of the real estate tax bill that's really the city's, and in truth is 3 or 4% or something like that. So, the city's getting more money in its pocket, but in terms of the TIF, it is coming from other places rather than directly from the city's pocket.
Understood.
Okay.
Sorry.
Ms. Padova.
Mr. Schenzer, can you just repeat the statement that you, Mr. Strum, verified that was correct? Can you?
Yes, so there's an existing agreement that was entered into in April 2021, I think. Sounds about right, thereabouts. And that existing agreement, the city had agreed to reimburse the developer for $1.4 million of the total public infrastructure costs, which at that time were estimated to be $3.4 million. Those costs have now gone up, like a lot of things, no surprise. The new ask is that, in essence, whether it's through a SIB loan or direct payments, that the city, by way of the TIF, cover 100% of those costs. Instead of just 1.4 million, the ask is now for somewhere in the ballpark of 4.4 to 4.5. Yeah, I can jump into the qualitative
Okay.
stuff, or we
No,
can.
let me ask another technical question. Just so I'm clear on this, when we're looking at addressing a millage rate change, if that millage rate did not change for the first 5 years, we wouldn't see quite that additional load. Is that right? Is that assuming that the millage rate changes effective immediately versus in?
Well, you calculate property taxes in arrears. So that would be, if you updated the millage rate to 105 in 2024, it would go into effect tax year 24, which wouldn't be collected until year 25. And so it would be delayed 12 months from deferral. In this instance, there's a tax abatement in place at 80% calculation. So it would be a reduction over 80% of the increased value for the first 10 years, and then you wouldn't really capture the true increase of that millage until year 11 year 12 tax year 11 of the project.
I think that was a master's level response, and I think I just need the undergrad. I think I'm just making sure, I think I'm just asking for the undergrad.
Property taxes
So-
are done in the arrears.
No, right.
Yes.
So, but if the millage rate doesn't increase hypothetically for 5 years, then we wouldn't see the first 5 years of the abatement period is going to still be at the existing
Correct.
millage. Okay,
Yes.
that's it. I just wanted to clarify
Okay,
that.
that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Should I be aware of a millage rate increase of 11 points in the next 3 years?
Thought they're going down.
Yeah, they're not, that's
They're not-
fair.
you're
They're
right,
not
they're not
going
decreasing.
down. They are not decreasing. But I do think it's fair to anticipate an increase over the life of this abatement.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Right.
Well, and we show the increased value of the land at a 1 point. You want to go up a little bit, Kevin? I have a future growth rate of 1.16, but you're right. I did not have an increase of the millage rate across. So certainly I could go back into these numbers and look at a millage rate with a similar future growth rate tied to it over the period of 30 years.
Well, the abatement only is in place for 10.
10 years.
Okay.
But you're still going to want to see that millage rate over 30 to recapture what the updated value of the abatement could be, what the increase of the TIF, because again, we're TIFing the whole thing as well. So you're still going to see increases in the TIF value over that same period of time too.
But from a cost to the city, that
Correct.
cost falls off after year 10.
Correct.
Yeah,
Because yeah, this is a non-school TIF as well. I should note that.
yes. All right. Mr. Schnitzer?
Sure, I can go again. So first off, thanks for all the information, guys, and I apologize if I'm kind of monopolizing your time. I just want to make sure that I thoroughly understand kind of all the moving parts here. Well aware that, markets have changed considerably in the last, let's call it 2.5 years or so. Mr. Underhill, you had made a comment just a few minutes ago about breaking even on the office tenant. Can you help me understand that a little bit? Just maybe explain some of the economics in your world.
Sure. So essentially, we're going to be buying the land at a number and then selling it again to the third party for them to build. They won't be our tenant necessarily. They're going to own their building. And so essentially, in order to make this work for them and for us, we've got to make our money back at least. But what they're willing to pay for the ground is going to be basically the same as Casta will be paying to purchase it. So it'll be within reason, a net zero in terms of the transaction, but it does add other value to the property.
Okay. I was going to ask, just real quick, how's that change or contrast versus sort of the original vision or the agreed upon vision just roughly 18 months ago, where there was some hospitality, some commercial, and I believe some office, albeit maybe a little bit smaller in scale. Was there, I assume that was profitable.
Yeah, and one of the points here, I think, with the underlying private business deal is that there were circumstances where I think the current property owner was going to be throwing the land into partnership deals and things, which made that money in cash that didn't need to be outlaid up front. I think what we're seeing with this particular, we're seeing a strong office market in this area, and I think Larry Canini, who couldn't be here this evening, but he's done a fabulous job marketing all of this in Buckles Court North, and I think we see maybe even some opportunity for a little more office today. The hotel market, even when we were going through this, we were kind of in the midst of COVID, right, and we didn't know what the world was going to bring, but I think the hotels, they're not getting the same room rates as they used to. There's just not as much interest outside of really big employment centers for doing 2 hotels for sure. But anytime you can do a deal of this magnitude with this payroll, it just made a lot of sense for the project. And I think there's still opportunity for more retail, and maybe it's a gas station, maybe it's something else. But we thought this opportunity was too good to pass up, and really, we're frankly, especially with the medical office market, it continues to grow, and it really made a lot of financial sense, even from a carrying cost perspective of sitting on ground for 3-4 years and getting the right hotel user in there. Who knows when that would happen, and this is a certainty.
Okay. So the next question, and again, I'm not trying to grill you guys. I promise there's no gotcha here. I'm just trying to, again, understand more, almost in a way, put myself in your shoes, to kind of find out what's the motivation behind the ask, because obviously I have, electors that I have to answer to as well if we're going to commit to, committing, capital resources to this or financial resources to the project. So I do want to go back in time just a few years. I think my understanding was, and this, Nate, forgive me, this predates you. I believe it predates the mayor and predates about half of council up here in attendance tonight. But I think the original vision, if you will, was, let's face it, the city wants the income tax, right? That's how we fund parks and public safety and all that other stuff. And so, suburban office is kind of our highest and best use. I believe suburban office, it was viewed as kind of the market at that time. It was necessary for some commercial to be in play, things like Starbucks, Chipotle, et cetera, so that those office tenants could have somewhere to go for lunch and, grab a coffee. But the problem with that mix of just suburban office and commercial was that the commercial would essentially die on the vine after 5 p.m. when everybody went home. So that's where the residential comes into play. what I'm seeing is basically commercials being kind of stricken from the plan here, scaling up the office a little bit, scaling up the residential a little bit. I just have to ask, what's the justification for the residential?
For the additional residential?
Just, period. If there's no commercial, then what's the justification for the residential?
Well, I think number one, I think there's a lot of you, first of all, I do believe there's going to be commercial here. We've shown a plan where I think this, if my direction's correct and the north is up on the plan, that, we'll have some sort of a retail component, whether it be, maybe a gas station isn't the sexiest use, right? But something like that, or I do
It's a
believe.
necessary use.
It's a necessary use.
For at least
It's
now.
convenient for employees, to, you're going home at night, you're going to grab something there, get your gas. The opportunities for the Starbucks and things are still there. We've shown a site with some more office on here, frankly, whether that comes to be or not, I don't know. I guess those could be office or retail. We think there's retail viability there, and I think the same sort of view of the world is there in terms of, the residential helping to support that. I do think the residential has been critical in terms of getting a user like the one we're going to have on the north here, because it does provide some convenience for the people to live right there. And
If I can jump in on that one, I will note in my conversations, so we do active business retention and expansion visits. There's an existing office client just down the road, Ohio Urology, and they have expressed interest of having proximity to their medical staff living there. They have struggled in the recruitment of doctors and other professionals for their spaces from a lack of housing, specifically for rent housing. Early stage professionals who are coming into the marketplace and having close proximity to new housing has been a very added benefit to what they've been exploring, and they actually have shared with me on multiple occasions of their interest in that, and that's an existing operator in our space. There are other employers within probably a 5 or 10 minute drive time that I would imagine are also, especially when they're recruiting younger stage professionals into their workplaces, either all paraprofessionals or better, who are looking for this type of opportunity to have people be able to move into the marketplace very, I won't say easily, but in a quality product with easy access.
Is that the target market for that residential?
if so. Can you hear me? There we go. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I see, sort of support staff, nursing staff being the sorts that live here, someone who, nurses who have just graduated from nursing school, Capital, or wherever, and living here. And, it's a different world than, I'm used to getting in the car and going wherever I want to go, right? But I don't think today's generation of new young professionals like that. They want to ride their bike over to their office or walk over there and be able to go home for lunch, right? So I think the target is exactly that, the younger professional.
Which is also why the park plan was to be expanded across the street, why I think I'm going to put Director Farrell on the point here. I just worked on a grant application with her office about doing some expansion and connectivity work across the way on Hamilton as well to better connect the park and this space into our existing parks and trail systems for that exact reason. We've been trying to capitalize some of these units to make our applications as competitive as possible, because we really do see these individuals either living and working in this space and then traversing and utilizing Gahanna's existing systems, or just maybe they work 10 minutes away and this is their escape out of that space as well. So it's a threefold approach, quite frankly.
And if I may, Madam Chair, just one more. Yes. So again, thanks for allowing me to take up so much time here. So just really one last question from me. It sounds like the ROI and the appeal from the city's perspective really hinges on that north tenant. Can you guys commit to that? I mean, and when I say commit, are you willing to put that in the agreement?
Well, one of the, I need to think through that. I think that maybe we could condition various obligations on that happening. I would hate to be in a position to, whenever you have third parties involved and they have to buy the land, right? They have to perform.
Yeah.
We believe they will, but we'd hate to have a sort of be penalized on our end and, in terms of breaching a contract or something if it didn't happen. So there's likely a way to condition our obligations on that happening. And that way you've got some protection if it doesn't happen. I mean, it's a totally different deal if that doesn't happen, right, from your perspective as well as ours. So I think that's something we'd be willing to closely look at and make a commitment to.
Thank you for that. That's all from me, Madam Chair.
Concerning
Angela,
that,
yes.
yeah, concerning that, they're going to potentially, these people we don't know, will purchase the property and then remain in and build their own thing that they want to build, and so they will own that.
That's
It will not be anything where they're going to be renting things. It's going to be their particular things, which is, to me, something very, I think we need to have.
I think having a single tenant building, well, they own the building, right? But it shows a commitment and you're not worried about different tenants coming in and out and having vacancies. So I think it's important to the stability of the project that it's a single tenant.
I think it was about a month ago, I sat down with Councilman Weaver and Councilwoman Padova and talked high level about this. And I'll echo Mr. Underwood-Hill's comments in sharing that when you have an owner-occupied space, it's a much different extended ROI with a level of commitment than what you have from an outside investor standpoint, Councilwoman. I think one of the challenges that we've had across the highway, if we're being perfectly frank and honest, is that you've got a number of different older, mid-90s-ish, even early 2000s-ish, maybe even late 80s-ish office buildings that are owned by outside investors from outside Gahanna, outside the region, outside of the state. And so there's no rush for them to backfill some of those spaces. Those that are owned locally, I can think of a couple that are owned by Daimler here in the marketplace. They're trying to backfill them as best we can, but we have a couple that are not. Candidly, the one that we are exploring, owned by a company out of Minnesota, and they were in no rush to do anything with it. And so I think it is a very fair point to understand that an owner-occupied, owner-invested facility is a lot different of a project than a third-party invested property.
I want to bring up the fact that last
Thursday.
Friday was
Thursday.
Thursday, we were at one of where the people were, shoveling the things, and these are all doctors that are owning that property, and they're going to be there for the rest of their times that they're around. And I think that's really important that we do that.
Very, very good point, and I do think it's important to the likelihood of success. And we're not speculatively building something that we're hoping to fill up. It's already going to be filled.
It's easy to see things when like, especially in the problems of inflation and all this stuff, that people might indeed go past things that have nothing in them anymore, because they were just rentals.
Well, and I will categorize this too. This is a aggressive office market today, but it's also, I'll caveat it by saying it's an aggressive medical office market. So it's a different space as well. These are highly specialized spaces. These have high levels of machinery and equipment installations. This isn't just dropping cubicles on a third floor and hoping for the best.
And this is an exciting thing to have. This is a wellness place that, I don't think there's anything that is better than that.
Agreed.
Yes, Mrs. Padova.
And on this diagram here, the buildings in C1, those ones are projected to be retail, correct? Near the retention pond?
That's correct.
Can you, just so I can kind of visualize this a little bit better, like what would be the size of those buildings? Would it be like one retail space, or would there be multiple spaces in each
We
building?
comped that as part of similar style of what Rocky Fork was over here. So you're going to see little smaller strip centers with maybe parcel outlays of 4 to 6 users per kind of structure.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Yes, Mrs. McGregor.
I have a couple. When we originally did this agreement, somebody asked, and it was stated maybe that these were all going to be market rate apartments. And somebody asked if there would be some, maybe like workforce development, but, or maybe affordable housing. I don't remember the term, but what is the mix now? Because I think they said it was different then.
Yeah, this will mostly be market rate, although we're cognizant of, even in the last 2 or 3 years, providing an affordable housing workforce component, not subsidized by any means, but yeah, if you pay attention to what the city of Columbus is doing, and when they are tying incentives to different percentages of average median income. And those depending on your zip code, those happen to be pretty high typically, believe it or not, unless you're in the real inner city in terms of even getting to 80% AMI and pegging a rent to it. We are actively going to be trying to provide some component of that in this project. Given all of the, what's going on with all the numbers and what we're trying to get to here, it's difficult for us to know if we can, what level of AMI we could get to, but you have our word that we'll try to, mix that into this project. I think other than, maybe a handshake and a wink and a nod here, it's hard for me to, on the floor, tell you something that we could do, and it requires a lot of study and market research, but that is definitely on our radar, and Casto's been doing that in a lot of their projects around town that they've been doing, providing that affordable component.
Yeah, I don't want to put,
Mr. Canini had said that, I think he said it was like only a 10% market rate, and that concerned me. And it was in different levels for the other, and that concerned me because originally it was 100% market rate with, the possibility of some affordable housing.
And so the 10% was the number of units to be set aside for market rate. Which way was he going?
He said 10% market rate, which is a marked change from what this development, when we had this development originally.
I think and maybe that was misstated or misunderstood, but
Okay.
we think it'd be more 90% market rate and 10% affordable. Yeah, so juxtaposition of those numbers perhaps.
Okay. The other question, and it's not maybe for you, but the question was brought up about the floodplain, and I'd like to see can we get a map of like where the floodplain is now? Not tonight, but I mean, can somebody send us Nate or development or someone?
we have it on the GIS. I mean, it will take about 2 seconds to pull it up on our city's GIS mapping.
Okay. It doesn't have to be tonight. I would just like to see where it is. That concerns me that it's going to be filled. I asked if it was going to be, the dirt was going to be moved within the floodplain, which is allowable, or if it was going to be fill. And it concerns me that they're going to bring fill in to do that. Okay.
I will note, and I know we've had a couple of conversations here in council chambers over the last month or so, and I don't know if this is the right team from Casto or not, but I think if you talk to your partners and the folks who have presented here at Move to Prosper, I think they've actually been a strong partner with Casto and some of their opportunities here in their marketplace. So, I mean, there's a very familiarity perspective with Casto and that group in particular who's presented before council and has spoken on a few things as well. So, if that is of interest to the council members.
I think, yeah, certainly, thank you for bringing that up, Nate. That was actually on my kind of items here, and I didn't want to get too far into the weeds with that level of granularity or site plan
Appreciate that.
issues. But it does seem to me that we have a lot of outstanding questions still remaining and some really kind of incredible, important elements and critical elements to this agreement that aren't actually in front of us yet. So it sounds to me like this maybe needs to come back to committee with the financing clarifications, the commitment that in the event that this end user does not come to fruition, that the city is not on the hook for this, the 4.4 that you're proposing. And then I'd also like to see the AMI potential division of affordability break versus market rate in the apartment projected multifamily.
In terms of a projection on what the art of the possible is, or are you looking for I think it'd be difficult to make a commitment to that, but we could run some numbers and demonstrate to you sort of what that renter would look like in terms of the affordable component. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, there's a significant, again, there are significant incentives on the table that the city has offered up. And when we approved this 18 months ago, I think that we approved this knowing that there were significant incentives at play with this parcel. And now there's additional funds that are being requested of the city.
Kevin, can you pull up the original ROI, the OG? that's in
Director,
there?
I understand. I get it.
Well, I just want to make sure it's clear. I mean, this
Yeah.
was a 5 to 10% number 18 months ago. It's at an 85+% number at this point. I mean, and again, I'm just being frank with the council. You get to a point with these types of projects where either the numbers pencil or the numbers don't. Councilman Stetzer, I'll push to you a little bit. You know, you and I sat down in a conversation maybe 2 months ago on a project and looked me straight in the eye when I got upset over it. And he goes, and you said to me point blank, either the numbers work, Nate, or they don't work. And if they work, then we'll figure it out. These numbers work so significantly better than they did 18 months ago based on that one user. And I fully appreciate the need to have that vetted and finalized a little bit. But I don't think you really tee up a project like this much better. And it's just my personal experience for 16 years.
I guess my view would be if, and we felt good about the project before. I guess I never, Nate wasn't here. We didn't really look at it in the context of an ROI at that point. That's just not how we thought about it on our side, but that's pretty compelling. And I think if the truth of the matter is, if we would have brought this probably to you now without the history behind it, it probably would seem pretty clear what you should do, but it's the fact that we have history behind it that really maybe muddies it a little bit. But I think if it stands on its own merits and we didn't have that history, it's a big win.
Well, I didn't mean to complicate things by, bringing up this affordability aspect of it, but there are two critical components to this contract that need to be worked out further. And so even if these ROI numbers look great, if this end user comes into fruition, it seems to me that there's a couple items that need to come into this contract that aren't here yet and then needs to be reviewed by our city attorney.
When's your next committee meeting?
In 2 weeks. Excuse me, I take that back. 3 weeks because we have a fifth Monday this month. So it's on the 14th. Mr. Schnetzer, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and Nate, I don't know if there was a rhetorical question buried in your comments, but I mean, I'll just simply say the prior agreement, no shock to individuals, the applicants, as well as the administration, I didn't vote in favor of it for primarily one reason and one reason only. It was that we were being asked to commit to a certain dollar amount without any sort of assurance that
Sure.
there would be a return. It was as simple as that. The fact that the project is changing, that the ask is changing, that there's been an acknowledgement that markets have shifted, I feel a bit vindicated in that vote. And I'll tip my hand a little bit here. My position is more or less unchanged, that I'd like to see some assurance that this end user that really that ROI table hinges on, that there's some sort of contingency in here, that if that doesn't happen, we're not on the hook for $4.5 million. So for that reason and that reason only, I would ask that it come back for the next committee meeting.
And I just want to say, I am excited that Casto is here. You certainly have a great reputation across the region, and I think that this is an exciting project, and especially now that we've identified you as the residential lead on this. So I do want to underscore my gratitude for you being involved in this project. Mr. Underhill?
Yes, thank you. So, we're willing, one of the issues is time kills all deals, and we do have, we've actually held off on executing a contract with this third-party user. We have the form of it agreed upon, but we needed to have this in place in order for that to happen. And so, I don't by any stretch of the imagination expect you to say, okay, we'll just go ahead and get this voted on tonight. But is there procedurally a way to keep this moving ahead and to council, and, we can have the conversation the next time. I just don't want to have to wait 3 weeks because, and even our contract is Casto with the underlying property owner, the clock's ticking, and so I'd love to be able to, understanding that we've got a few things we've got to address, but still move it ahead procedurally. You can always table us at that time if you're not, or send us back. But would that be something you would entertain?
Is there first reading on this one?
There's not been a first reading on this yet.
No, then it's going to change. Bringing it back, correct? First reading would be our next regular.
First reading would be, if we potentially held a first reading on the 7th, it would come back to committee on the 14th and then on for vote at the 21st.
Yeah, that would be extremely helpful, and we still have time to iron these things out, and we'll do our best to roll up our sleeves to have a, if we want to use the first reading to have that conversation publicly about what we've done, that'd help us on our side with the timing.
Are we more comfortable with that approach versus waiver and emergency? Okay.
Might I also-
Mr. Weaver, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Might I also make a suggestion? Since we do have the 5th Monday where we're not meeting, perhaps Director Strom would be willing to serve as a point of contact to sort of field any questions that council has in the interim and provide those to Casto in the meantime so they're better able to address those at the next committee?
As long as you're not interrupting my trick-or-treating on Monday, I'm fine with that.
Well, so typically during first reading, we don't have a discussion of the item, but if we request, we can certainly put it on for a discussion, as a discussion item. Council President Renner isn't here tonight, but I would certainly be open to having that presentation on the agenda on the 7th. Does that sound like a reasonable approach? And that way we can be better prepared for discussion on the 14th as needed? Or just leave it on for first reading?
I mean, I'm still working on the 31st. If we want to do something in the evening to talk as well. Oh, look, everyone's like, no, it's our night off. I understand that, but we could certainly do a workshop of some sort as well if anyone was interested on next Monday. I'm here. Happy to have a workshop conversation on it too.
Yes, Mr. Schnetzer.
Well, apologies to get down in the weeds on procedure, but I mean, I think, just for clarification, I think Madam Chair and myself were asking was that it just simply follow sort of the normal routine course of business, which would be that it would come back for one more committee. It doesn't slow down any of the readings or anything like that. But if there's an ask that there be some form of waiver, et cetera, I just didn't see it, so.
There is no way, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I guess to the applicants, we're not intentionally slowing it down. We're just kind of going through the normal routine process
Understood,
here.
and I just want to make sure, I want to be forthright too, and we didn't take any offense by it or anything. It's just we are, it's the way that the market is, right? So we don't want to lose the fish we've got on the line, as we were just saying over here with our user, and we also have a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross with, if we got to get, frankly, if we can't get pretty close here, this whole thing goes away, and we don't want that. And we'll roll up our sleeves on some of these items, but keeping the schedule and really, I mean, I guess, am I correct that we're sort of trending towards having this done before Thanksgiving at the moment?
I believe the second reading will be the 21st, so yes.
Yeah, so if we can keep that end goal in mind, what happens in the interim is irrelevant. It's really getting to that date.
My ask would be that we have a final proposed development agreement for the agenda for first reading. That helps us have a cleaner legislative process so that we're not fighting through which exhibit we're attaching to the ordinance. So, is that fair? I mean, no, I'm sorry, it would need to be on the agenda by that Thursday preceding.
Okay.
For
great. All right.
for publishing on
We can do that.
the 4th. So the development agreement should be done by the Thursday, the 3rd.
Great, well, that's doable.
Okay.
Thank you for
Thank
that. I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Section D on the agenda, items from the Department of Finance. We have one item tonight, Ordinance 64-2022, an ordinance amending Ordinance 54-2022 to establish and appropriate funds as required for grant and loan agreements associated with the infrastructure construction and loan agreement for Science One LLC, extension of Tech Center Drive, waiving second reading and declaring emergency. Director Burry.
Good evening. So this is just some housekeeping. So when the original report came forward, it was kind of missing giving me the authority to establish appropriations and the appropriate funds for all the agreements that were associated with the legislation. So this is just requesting that request be added to the original ordinance. And the process for wager and emergency and waiver is just following the original legislation to make sure everything's in place.
Excellent. Any questions or discussion? Consent agenda? All right, very good. And just congratulations, Director Burry, since we have an opportunity to tell you in person on your recognition by the GFOA.
Thank you.
All right, Section E, items from the Department of Public Service. We have two items tonight.
If I could, I'm going to introduce council to our interim director of public service. This is Mr. Rob James. Rob James joined us back in July on a part-time basis. He has I'll just say over 30. How's that, Rob? Over 30 years of experience in the public service, public works arena, most recently retiring as director of the Streets and Utilities Division at the City of Dublin. He, again, came on board in July with us on a part-time basis to help offer support for the Departments of Public Service and Engineering when we were really strapped for time. And we were actually lucky that he was here, so he's helping us right now as interim director of public service while we recruit for that position. So welcome, Mr. James.
Thank you, Mayor. So much for sliding in under the radar. Every quarter, the Public Service Department submits supplemental appropriation requests for revenue we receive from three categories, typically damages to city property, sale of assets, and water meter fees. This quarter, we're requesting supplemental appropriations for two of those three categories. Action item number one is for damage to city property and is a transfer of $70 from the general fund to fleet services. And action item number two is for water meter fees and is a transfer of $15,314 from the water fund to the materials and supplies line item. Be happy to answer any questions.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Director James. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Any questions or discussion? All right, consent agenda? Very good, thank you. Thank you, Director.
We started you with the tough one, Rob.
I know. I thought we got rid of having those items come in front of us. The $70 transfer, not so much. All right, Section F, items from the Department of Engineering, Ordinance 67-2022, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with American Structure Point, Inc. for professional services related to the Wynn Ridge Court Bridge replacement, PID 116417. Director Comling?
Yes. Good evening, Chair Bowers and members of council. Respectfully requesting authorization to enter into contract with American Structure Point for the replacement of the Wynn Ridge Court Bridge replacement. It was identified by bridge inspection reports back in 2021, in need of replacement. There was some remedial work that was done late August, early September with some rock channel stabilization and securing of a wing wall at the location. We see the design progressing forward in consultation with the Ohio Department of Transportation, who will be administering construction on the project. We believe it'll take likely close to a year in design services, and then depending on if right-of-way acquisition and any utility coordination is otherwise required, then progressing into construction, which we anticipate to last anywhere from 4 to 5 months. There are 7 impacted properties on the cul-de-sac. We anticipate maintaining traffic to accommodate the access to the residents there. Open it to any questions.
Thank you, Director. Any discussions? Mrs. McGregor?
That when we've talked about bridges before, they say bridges should last about 75 years. That cul-de-sac was built about, that culvert was built about in 1996. So that is way less. I mean, is there any way we can, I mean, go back on the developer to recoup some of that? Because it was obviously built very poorly to go, to need replacing in 26 years when usually they last 3 times that long.
I will admit that they should last longer. The corrosion and some of the issues that have occurred there, I don't know, are recourse to go back on the developer, 20-plus years removed.
I mean, that's certainly something we could explore, and at least pose the question to the city attorney to see if there's any basis for that. But I'm not immediately familiar with that. This would be the first time we've had a case like that in the last 3 years.
It seems like, I mean, I remember going to when they had the Parade of Homes there, and it was about 1996, and, you know, it was brand new, and I just, it seems like that is just really not, it should have lasted way longer than that, and it seems like we should look at least, you know, recouping some of the loss from that. It should have been built better.
Just question, Director, was there any indication when I think we had a geotech firm come in to at least do temporary longer-term repairs, was there any evaluation as to, did they make as to what caused the bridge to fail?
No, I can reach out to them and report back.
That might be helpful to determine a path forward if there is one.
Thank you. That's just my only question, is just.
Any other questions?
I will say, when they built that, that bridge was originally built, it didn't have the fences along the side that it has now to keep, you know, like on the abutments. And kids playing, as kids do, playing on there, and one fell off and broke his arm. And so they did fix it so that there were bridges there. But I mean, it seems like from the start that bridge, or culvert, whatever you want to call it, has had problems.
Director, just for sake of kind of discussion and thinking about how the erosion that you've referenced in your report that's led to this need, do you have any suggestions as far as causes for the erosion?
So as far as any, like the waterproofing and perimeter drainage in the area, it'd be looking at whether those facilities were put in, or if there was any causes for failure associated with that.
Is that going to be anticipated as part of this contract in terms of identifying why this failed so quickly? And
so I can check back on the reports and going through back through with ODOT to see root cause assessments on it.
Okay, excellent. Any other discussion on this tonight? All right. This will be on, just to clarify, with items under items E as well. On for first reading, no need to come back, and then consent agenda. And then items under D were with waiver and emergency, so that'll just go straight to consent. Okay? If nothing else, then that concludes our meeting, Committee of the Whole for this evening. Thank you, Director.
Mr. Van Meter, on your cue. There you go. Okay. So thanks, everyone. Let's commence Finance Committee for October 24th, 2022. We just have one item on the agenda today. It's a discussion item, a capital improvement plan presentation. So with that, Director Burry, when you are ready.
Actually, I'll start, Councilman, if that was fine.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Chair, if that would be good with you.
Madam Mayor, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. So for the past year, the administration has been working on the development of the city's first ever long-term capital improvement plan. I think I've mentioned before that with the passage of Issue 12 in May of 2019, as we all know, we now have a dedicated funding stream that enables us to move capital projects forward. Residents have entrusted us with those dollars, and it's critical that we have a defined strategic approach as to how we will invest those dollars for the overall betterment of the city going forward. A capital improvement plan is a tool that the City of Gahanna will use to ensure that public services improve over a multi-year period, as well as to ensure the timely repair and replacement of aging infrastructure. It also will provide a level of certainty for residents and businesses regarding the location and timing of public investments, and also help to ensure that we have responsible growth with responsible spending. Once developed, the capital improvement plan you'll hear referred to as CIP for short term, because everybody likes acronyms around here. The CIP will be a living, breathing, working document that will be reviewed and updated on an annual basis to reflect the changing needs of the community and our changing priorities. And with that, our focus over the past year has been to develop a strong CIP, capital improvement plan, that truly embodies accountability, transparency, and sustainability, not only for tomorrow, but for 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. As part of tonight's presentation, we are going to talk about what a CIP is, what it is not, what is the difference between a capital improvement plan and a capital budget, how a CIP is implemented and how it functions, because it will look different, and we've done CNAs for many, many years, so this will look a little bit different and function differently. And talk about the work that has been done to date to present the information we're going to share with you tonight. And then finally, we'll talk about what next steps will look like after tonight as we continue to work with you on this plan. So next, I'd actually like to turn this over to Corey Weibensinger, our finance manager, to talk a little bit about what a CIP is.
All right, good evening. Again, I'm going to, for some of you, maybe it's a refresher on a CIP or a capital improvement plan, but also use this as an opportunity for an overview and education for those watching at home as well. A capital improvement plan is intended to assist in making choices, right? It's a tool Gahanna will use to ensure their infrastructure and public services improve over a multi-year period. Once this tool is developed, it should be a working document, as the mayor has just mentioned. A strong CIP embodies accountability, transparency, and sustainability. So the capital improvement plan typically includes the following information. The plan includes a description of proposed capital projects. These projects will be ranked based upon priority and funding consideration. It ensures the timely repair and replacement of aging infrastructure. It provides a level of certainty for our residents, businesses, and developers regarding the location and timing of public investments. It identifies the most economical means of financing improvement projects. It provides an opportunity for public input in the budget and financing process. It eliminates unanticipated, poorly planned, and unnecessary capital expenditures. It eliminates sharp increases to user fees, debt levels, to help cover unexpected capital improvements. It helps to ensure that patterns of growth and development are consistent with applicable city studies and plans. And it helps to balance desired public improvement and the community's financial resources. Capital improvement plans and the annual budgeting process are closely linked. The first year of the capital improvement plan will be known ultimately as the capital budget, and it outlines specific projects and appropriate funding for those projects. It is intended to be adopted in addition to the city's annual operating budget. Following the public review and revisions as part of the budget process, the government body will be requested to vote to adopt the CIP as the capital budget. Funding for projects set to be developed in later years will then be authorized in the fiscal year in which they occur. While these later projects aren't funded immediately, the plan helps the government anticipate upcoming needs and budget accordingly. Understanding that our plan should include a list of projects, equipment, and major studies, priority ranking of those projects, financing plan, timetables for construction, completion of those projects, project justifications, classifications, itemizations, and explanations for the project expenditures. The process begins with a collection of a list of capital projects, equipment needs, etc. Major studies, plans, and initiatives are all collected and reviewed. The inclusion of the major studies, plans, and initiatives are extremely important, as these have been built from engagements of the citizens and stakeholders that provided input. The project description and justification, an estimate of initial project cost, ongoing operating and maintenance costs, and recommended potential funding sources are sought to be provided. This will help with creating the CIP to rank the projects in order of priority. Assignment of a CIP coordinator or a single official who is responsible for coordinating the preparation of the capital improvement plan is needed to take ownership and accountability of the plan. Evaluation and selection of current projects and funding sources should be considered through the following criteria: desired service level standard for the community, project demand determined by the inventory of existing land, equipment, and facility conditions, number of residents of geographic area served, return on investment, cost savings, and revenue generation, sustainability or energy efficiency improvements, economic, environmental, aesthetic, or social impacts, public health, safety, or other legal concerns, consistency with community plans and policies, and public or political support. A comprehensive financial analysis should also be conducted. Finance will then collect all financial data, including historic and projected local government revenues, expenditures, and debt service. This information is used to assess the city's ability to pay for proposed projects. The analysis also helps to select the appropriate financing and funding options. The CIP coordinator will update the capital improvement plan, which includes a list of recommended projects by funding year, scheduling details, and financing sources. The CIP coordinator will also ensure that detailed maps, photos, graphs, timelines, and other illustrations to help accompany the plan are updated as needed to create transparency and fluidity of the document. When a fully developed capital improvement plan is in place, it will synchronize capital and operating budgets. It will systematically evaluate competing demands for resources based upon the prioritization. It will reflect the city's long-term goals and objectives. It will identify, prioritize, and optimize the financing of capital projects. It will link all comprehensive plans with fiscal capacity. And it informs the public about the government's investment in infrastructure and incorporates appropriate policy. A capital improvement plan needs to be dynamic. It may be created to look at 5, 10 to 20 years, but it isn't a set it and forget it document. It's a working document that should guide our leadership team and create sustainability. It will need to be reviewed and updated so it can reflect Gahanna's changing needs and priorities. And discussing where we are with this current document, I'll hand over to Director Burry.
So where are we today? What have we done so far? Now that we kind of know what a CIP plan is and everything that it should incorporate and all the plans that we need to take to get it into action, what we've done to date is we've looked at all of the plans across the city along with the help of our consultants, Inside Advisors. So some of the audience that they grabbed was the original CNA from last year, the capital needs assessment. They looked at the economic development plan and the land use plan. From those plans, they consolidated a large list of capital projects. At that point, we also looked to what we had outstanding. So we started to meet with department directors to go through that list to determine what should stay on the list, what was currently in progress, and what needed further analysis before it could actually be determined to be included in the CIP. At that point, when we were looking at, well, what do we have outstanding? We decided that before we could actually move forward, we probably needed to take a step back for a second and look at all the encumbrances that were currently outstanding for projects and determine what stage were they all in. Had RFP documents been issued? Had bid documents been prepared? Were they already done with planning and design? Were they in the construction phase? Were they near completion? So trying to figure out for all those projects that were outstanding, what level were they at? Once we identified what level those projects were at, and keeping those projects in place that had some form of progress forward, based on that, what was our actual capacity for 2023? So looking at where we were, what we had capacity for, we developed what our 2023 capital budget request would be. So again, looking at those current projects that were outstanding, what stage they were in, and what we had capacity to do. Like to just kind of show you kind of what that looks like. We're not going to go through each project, but we're kind of just to give perspective of what you can expect as we're completing 2022 and moving into 2023. You will get the list when you receive the PowerPoint, so it will be attached to, so you could look at it in more detail as we're leading up to the 2023 budget discussions. Do we need to do something else?
If you didn't share the screen, you have to stop sharing it. It's not going to switch. If you shared the window, that's, yeah. Don't share the window, share the screen.
Is yours working?
There we go.
I have my own laptop. I'm just not gonna use it.
There we go. So again, I just kind of wanted to look at kind of totals and where we're looking for wrapping up 2022 projects that are currently in progress and what we're going to be looking to towards 2023. Again, we'll go into further discussion with these as we approach budget discussions. So just looking at the capital improvement fund alone, we currently have about $19.3 million in projects that are ongoing and are in various stages. And then for 2023, looking at that and what we have capacity for, looking at a budget request of about $6.7 million. So for the capital projects fund alone, we're looking at managing approximately $26 million in capital. As we're completing 2022, those projects that might move into 2023 that carry over, plus what we're requesting for 2023. As we kind of move down through the other governmental funds, just looking at governmental funds in total, which would also include your street fund, the remainder of the ARP funding, and what we're predicting to bring in for TIF funds and what we could use those for projects. We're looking at a total of about $21.9 million of 2022 projects to complete, and requesting an additional 8.4 to bring us to about 30.3 million just in the governmental funds.
Joanne, can I ask just a clarifying question on that particular topic, essentially what's being shown on the screen, just to make sure that, and I imagine others have this question too, but just to understand the interplay between the various fiscal years and also sort of the nexus between the capital budget and the capital plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is it accurate to say that 2022, those dollars that have essentially been appropriated but maybe projects not completed are moving from calendar 22 into calendar 23. And then inclusive in the capital budget is also appropriations from 2023. That's how you get to that 19-ish million, or I'm sorry, the 20.
Correct.
Okay.
And by the end of the year, that number will shrink a little bit as
Okay.
far as what we're carrying over. This was a snapshot.
Okay.
About the beginning of October. So there will be some run out of these 2022 projects before the end of the year. But yes, there will be some carryover as projects need to be completed depending on what stage they're currently in. So like I said, they're in various stages. Some just have documents prepared, some might just be planning and design. So depending on what stage they're in and what we accomplish before the end of the year.
Okay. So taking the capital budget and dialing the lens out a little wider to the capital plan, is it safe to say that what we're seeing on the screen is, in essence, not going to ask you to necessarily commit to line item by line item, but in essence, that is year one of the capital improvement plan?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So then we'll kind of look at what was planned for proprietary funds. The one key thing that you'll notice here is when we kind of looked at what do we have for capacity when we're looking at proprietary funds, remembering that the main department who handles most of the projects on the governmental side is also the main department that's handling the proprietary funds, or our engineering department. So kind of looking at each of those proprietary funds and what they currently had in progress and what they would have capacity to do in 2023. The decision was made that really we need to firm up and complete those 2022 projects so we can analyze what do we really need moving forward. So the plan currently is to just run out those 2022 projects and complete them before any future requests are made.
From the enterprise fund.
Correct. So that brings the total enterprise funds looking at 2022 to about $6.4 million in projects that we'll be working on through 2022 and 2023. And then looking at the city as a whole, we're looking at about $36.7 million in projects that will be managed through the end of the year and into the 2023 timeframe.
Big number. Is it all right if we pause there and take a couple questions?
Sure.
All right. Ms. Bowers, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a quick kind of clarifying question. Just skimming over this list with, like, looking up and.
Yeah, that's why I said it will be delivered to you, so.
Okay, good. Okay.
No reason to kind of try to memorize it all tonight.
It looks to me like it's mostly either just kind of maintenance or deferred maintenance at this point, and not other. I saw the Price Roadhouse as far as a kind of a prospective project. Is that a fair kind of assessment of what we're still kind of on catch up right now?
Correct. Some of the other newer projects that are on there mainly fall under the TIF funding, as far as the Hamilton Road Bridge, some of the other projects that are in there. And then as far as new, we also have the continual work on the Taylor Station Claycraft intersection improvement. So those are some new ones. But yes, for the majority of them, it's especially in the capital improvement fund, it's running out those maintenance programs and getting ourselves caught up to a point where we could look at them a little bit more responsibly.
This one keeps going off, but
Any other questions from council at this point? None? Okay. Thank you.
So now that we've kind of talked about where we currently are, so now what are our next steps? So what we'll be doing is looking at modernizing and enhancing some of our rating programs. So we kind of talked about those maintenance programs and figuring out a way that we could enhance those programs to make our forecasting a little bit better when it comes to those maintenance programs. So looking at the street rating, how we rate vehicles and equipment and determine replacement, along with some of those other maintenance programs. We also have the Parks Master Plan that is nearing completion, which includes a capital maintenance and improvement part to it. Those will be incorporated into the CIP. So that's already going through a pretty extensive process. So we'll be taking the recommendations from that plan and laying them into the capital improvement plan. The next thing that we'll be looking at is drafting those council policies. So what those policies will be intended to do as you adopt the CIP is kind of give us the guardrails for how we request capital improvements. And then what we do after the funding is requested. How are we going to report back progress? And then how are we going to determine the best way to close out those projects and return the unused funding? So making sure we kind of have those guidelines based on council policy to kind of keep us in line and on track with what we're doing with the plan. Next, thanks to the new city engineer who's been working very hard on getting some templates drafted and ways for us to better forecast projects and through the various planning phases. So coming up with templates that can be used to determine, okay, what's my planning and design and how long is that going to take and what does the cost look like? Once I move from planning and design, when can construction really begin? And what does that cost look like? So using more of a basis of designing, using a template that we could use across departments. So when we're requesting items, we're kind of standardized in how we're selecting what is going to be designed, when is that going to be laid in, when can construction begin. The other thing that we're going to be doing is once kind of all those things are updated and we have good templates and we have policies drafted, is bringing that focus group back together. So the focus group consists of the mayor, department directors, and a couple members from council. And as far as that focus group, it'll be firming up what are those policies, making sure that we have those in place. What is the actual length of the plan? Firming up the focus areas. And then how are we going to prioritize projects? And then what are those, again, those policies? So will it be a 5, 10, 15, 20 year? What is the appropriate length that we want to use? Making sure that focus areas are good, making sure that we're comfortable with how we're prioritizing projects. Once that occurs and we kind of have all that groundwork laid, then we'll be able to update the timeline, update associated costs for each project, and that'll allow for using resources in a better planned manner and making sure that we're keeping our request within those resources that are available. And the goal will also be to position the city to take advantage of alternate funding sources, such as grants, partnerships, debt. The majority of the time, you have to have all your assessment, feasibility studies, you have to at least have your plan and design done before you could approach looking for those alternate resources. So by using a new template and determining, well, when can we have plan and design done? When can we have our assessments and feasibility done? To then look, are there funding opportunities available beyond the resources that we have? And are we positioned in a manner that we could apply for those or approach those alternate funding sources? And then again, as we continue through the process through 2022 and into the future, there may be a need for adjustment and change, especially as we're completing 2022 in our work. There may be additional requests for 2023, either as the budget is finalized or as we move into 2023, requesting some supplemental appropriations as we continue the process. But again, making sure that we have policies and processes in place to report back changes that are made, why those changes are being made, what the rationale is behind it. And then every year, figuring out the process to bring it forward along with the budget request so the capital improvement plan could be formally adopted at least annually, and then used to then create the capital budget request as we approach the capital process and approving appropriations.
Great. Thank you. Questions from council regarding timeline? Ms. Bowers, did you have any?
I did. I appreciate the presentation and really comprehensively going over the CIP. I know we've been talking about it for years, and so it's good to see it coming forward. I'm curious about the engagement of council and specifically the development of council policy around this. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit more? I thought I heard you say could you explain a little bit more about that process?
So as part of the development of the capital improvement plan, we created that focus group. And as part of that, 2 members of council do sit on the focus group. Currently, it is Michael Schnetzer and Stephen Renner. So basically, their job will be to attend those meetings, look at what we're proposing, and then to report back to fellow council members kind of what our progress is, what we're leaning towards. But then as that plan is brought forward to council as a whole, there'll be additional opportunity to weigh in before adoption.
If I could just piggyback off of that, I think you had mentioned something about council rules as it pertains to the CIP. I was just hoping maybe you could shed a little bit more light on, just hypothetically, what would that kind of look like? Yeah.
So basically, kind of setting those guardrails for how we're requesting capital improvements. So what needs to be accomplished first before we even ask for capital dollars? Do we need to have certain assessments done? Do we need to have feasibility studies done? And then looking at once capital projects are approved and the appropriations set, if a project, for whatever reason, were to sit stagnant, should it sunset? Unless we approach council and explain why there has been no movement on that project. And is council in agreement that it should stay in place, or maybe they feel that based on the circumstances, it should sunset? And then also looking at once a project is completed. Kind of we have an informal process right now, but more setting what those guardrails would look like. So maybe there's, after a project is completed, all outstanding encumbrances are automatically closed after a 2-year period, or giving some sort of window to close those out without somebody from finance having to reach out and find out, has it been closed? Do we need to keep the funding? So more setting just a regular process of looking at, okay, it's completed, we're past that 2-year mark, all encumbrances are closed out at that part. Any remaining funds would be returned to on-reserve balance to be used for future projects. So those are kind of the top 3 that we've kind of discussed now. But again, it's going to be an ever-evolving and changing document. So as we move through the process, we could determine, is there a need for more policy, or do those policies maybe need to be amended?
Thank you. Anything from council regarding this topic? No? All right. Well, hearing nothing, then I suppose thus concludes Finance Committee. Thank you, everybody.